Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightlight. Thanks for joining us and spending some of your evening with us. We hope to give you an amazing 2 hours to express all sorts of wonderful and antiquity and insight and wisdom, and share with you some of the knowledge that isn't common amongst history books or even the common folk. We have a really great show for you tonight, but first I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for the intro. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com. Please check it out. It's a fascinating site, and it is another way of preserving history that a lot of us have never experienced, but is quite amazing. Mark has an amazing show for you tonight. It's on one of my favorite topics, and it's very exciting because it's an area that I have not delved into either, so we're all going to get enlightened together. So see if I can find Mark. Mark, you there?
I am here.
Okay. All yours.
How are you doing?
Doing well.
Good, yeah. Hey, we have a great week lined up for everyone, and these are the guests I want for this week. I think it's a great extension from last week, and I'm very excited about tonight's show as well as Thursday's show, and that will be at 9 p.m. Eastern. We hear about giants in the Ohio River Valley, Kanawha River Valley. You can read Dr. Webb's The Dover Mound. Basically, the eastern United States is very well represented by giants. You have several examples in the western United States, like the Lovelock Cave and Catalina Island. But we almost never hear of giants in the Caribbean. Our guest is going to change. Yeah, pirates, but not giants.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that. You just really don't think about giants on Aruba. You might think about having toes in the sand and a pina colada or something like that, but not the giants. But my travel buddy Heather Arnold is our guest tonight, and she's going to broaden our understanding of the worldwide occupation of giants. You can also take her tours of the Islands of the Giants. The Islands of the Giants is also our Facebook page. Heather is also out and about in New York and New England investigating stone chambers and walls. Similar interest as what Barbara has. So, yeah, we're going to have our perceptions changed of the Caribbean archipelago. So, hi, Heather. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Oh,
nice
I'm fine.
To see you.
Yeah.
Speak to you, not see you.
Yeah.
And Barbara as well. Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me on tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. This is great way to kick off the week. And yeah, how did Heather? How did you get learn about giants in the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I lived down in Aruba for several years. And when I moved down to Aruba, I wanted to start a tour company, and that's what I did. So I did Harley-Davidson rentals and tours and private Jeep tours. And I wanted the tours to be historically accurate as possible, because as I would wander about the different tour companies, trying to glean some knowledge of what I should be focusing the tours on and what other tour companies were making the subject of their tours, I noticed that the history of the island was a little spotty, and sometimes tour guides would make jokes or make the history up, maybe just to garner more tips if they said something funny, but no one was really focusing on the actual history of the island. It was more for entertainment rather than actual knowledge. And so my goal was to make the tours as interesting and informative and true, close to the truth as possible. And I began to discover it was very difficult to get the true story of Aruba in terms of the history. It was easy to get the history of the islands once the Dutch came and took over the three islands, because we're really talking about the three islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. Of course, I was based in Aruba. When they came and colonized the Dutch and made the islands part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, of which they still are today, there you can get history right down to the day and sometimes the time and very specific. But in terms of the history before the colonialization or even the introduction of the Europeans to the islands, it was a very spotty history. And I realized after speaking to the Aruban people and looking at some documents that were public documents for tourists talking about the history of the islands, it all started with this idea that the islands were called the useless islands. And the children were learning that their island was useless. And that's how the Europeans first perceived these islands, as useless. And the justification behind that was that the Europeans, when they first came, the first explorers came, said, "Oh, we can't grow anything on these islands because they're so arid and dry. They're essentially desert islands. So the islands are the useless islands. We'll call these the useless islands." And I had a very big problem with that. First of all, it didn't sit right with me. It didn't make sense, because there were a lot of resources the islands had that actually the Europeans did in fact exploit, that would be far from generating the concept of a useless island. And furthermore, my daughter is Aruban. She's half Aruban, half American. And I thought, this is a terrible thing to be teaching children in school, or for my daughter to think I come from an island that was called a useless island. And just because the Europeans named it the useless island, certainly to me didn't sound like it should be justification for still maintaining this, what I presumed and was a myth. And there were a couple of reasons why I didn't feel that that was the true story of these islands just being useless. Number one is that Aruba, in particular, still to this day has a lot of gold in the earth of that island, as well as much gold has been extracted. So the island has gold, and furthermore, the island of both Aruba and Bonaire were filled with a certain type of vegetation called the Brazil wood tree. And the Brazil wood tree was actually deforested so much by the Europeans it's completely gone from the islands based off of their activities, because particularly during the Renaissance, the Brazil wood tree was very important and a commodity, because you would make musical instruments out of Brazil wood. It's a very resilient wood. You could also make canoes, and you could also use the ink that it provides to dye robes, a beautiful royal red color, and also use it as dye for other things as well. So I knew that the term useless island, although it was applied by the Europeans, it didn't actually make sense. And as I researched further, I went to the Archaeology Museum in Aruba, which is very nice, by the way, and I was kind of told the same thing. I don't think it was trying to put me on a different path and get me confused. I think they literally, the people working there, thought that their islands were called the useless islands, and really didn't have a grasp of what happened before in terms of what was going on the islands, and what were the islands, what were the original names of the islands by the inhabitants, for example. So then I continued to do some research, and I did some online, and I came across a paper. It was written by an archaeologist, going on and on and on about how there was no proof on the islands that there were ever giants. And I thought, why is this person going on and on and on about giants on these islands? Who's even asking? Who even brought it up and said, oh, there are giants on the islands? Prove me wrong. I didn't. It was such a strange rebuttal to a non-argument. So I then began to research about the original discovery of the islands. And that is when I came across Amerigo Vespucci's personal account of his interaction with the inhabitants of Aruba and then Curacao. He went to two islands on his journey when he first arrived in 1499. And it was in his papers, the first letters he wrote to the sovereigns upon his return, that he notes that the islands were called the Islands of the Giants due to the large inhabitants who lived there. And that was my first introduction to of scratching the surface, really, and that's really what it was, to the true history of those three Caribbean islands that really hug the South American coastline, and that is that there were a giant race of people who lived there. At first, we were told it was 5,000 years ago. Now, just a week and a half ago, the archaeologists, through dating these sites, found out the sites could be as old as 8,000 years old. From as going as far back as 8,000 BC, and so now we're learning that this was a race of people that, by the way, was still interacting with the mainland Indians who came and then inhabited Aruba, and the smaller statured, average statured people and the giants were both coexisting at the time that the first Europeans did arrive on the islands. So this was actually a story that needed to be told. It's an amazing story. These small islands in the middle of the sea have this incredibly interesting and fantastic history that was just waiting to be told. And I'm so happy that I kind of got caught up in it. And now I think I'm probably one of the only people on this earth who's doing the type of research I am, getting to the bottom of it, and it's strictly through the archaeological record. It's solely what I use to determine the history of those islands and the history of the first population who lived on those islands, which were the giants.
Okay, so you're studying basically 9,500 years.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's and the archaeological record supports Vespucci's claims, and it's in the records it dictates as such. So it's just so strange, why it was covered up, why it continues to be something that's taboo and not spoken of. It's very challenging to me, but fortunately, the people of the islands, they are completely excited about this turn of events, excited about the information, proud of the information, and definitely open-minded to it. As a matter of fact, I get a lot of tips from the people of the islands who send me messages about rock formations that they found or stories that they've heard about giants in their family and petroglyphs that they have on their property. So it's been an amazing thing to be able to bring the true story of the people, bring light to it, and bring this true story to the people because and to the world, because this is part of our human story. This is part of our existence on Earth, and I think it's so important that we know about all of our ancient history as much as we possibly could, particularly if it's something so interesting as giants involved. I think if children went to school and went to a history class and the teacher said, okay, tomorrow, kids, we're going to learn about the giants, I mean, kids would be so excited. I think it's just a shame that, that there hasn't been more of a focus on the actual ancient history that involves the giants in schools and in general, really.
Okay, so over this lengthy period of time you've been studying, what evidence have the giants left behind on Aruba? You just mentioned some megalithic structures. Okay, can you describe those? Are they similar to some of the structures in Europe that the listeners may have heard more about from guests like Maria Wheatley?
Well, there are some in terms of what they've left behind. First of all, their bones. They have their skeletons on all three islands. But furthermore, in terms of megalithic structures, there are petroglyphs on all three islands. The largest cave system in the Caribbean exists under those three islands. As a matter of fact, there is purported to be a cave that extends from Aruba all the way to Venezuela, south, 16 miles. And there in Bonaire, there are at least 400 caves, if not more. Some are submerged, some are slightly underwater, some are not underwater, some are high on mesa walls and within limestone terraces. And some of these caves appear to be worked. And what I mean by worked is, and this is coming from archaeologists, and the archaeologists actually use the word worked, that aside from stalagmites and stalactites being carved into faces of women, of total female bodies with wearing a veil, for example. There also appears to be altars made within the caverns and pillars. It's as if these natural formations were carved to accommodate ritual, I would assume, and definitely ritual, habitation, and burials. All three occurred in the caves, as well as I presume birthing. But then, so you have this working of the insides of caves, which are, and when I'm saying altars or thrones, there's also a couple of thrones. These are massive structures. These are very large, maybe 25 feet high structures. I mean, very, very high structures, 20 feet high, carved. The handprints, for example, in some of these caves are at least 14 feet up from the earth, from the ground where you're standing. So then we also have, for example, in Aruba, which Aruba actually maintains the most archaeological record of this time than the other two islands. That's simply because in Aruba, and particularly, there was no slavery. There were no slaves brought in because there was never a way to have any type of planting going on, any need for additional labor because, as I said, it was a desert island. It's the driest of the three islands. And so the archaeological record has been greatly preserved on the island because there hasn't been a lot of upheaval of the earth. So on Aruba, we have a very strange structure. And as soon as I saw it, I said, this is very odd because it's called Kasabari Rock Formation. And if you read in the tourist guides put forth by the Aruban government on this rock formation, they'll describe it as very mysterious, seems to come out of nowhere, literally they'll say seems to be built by giants. It's just, I don't even think they know about the giants or any of this. And when you see this megalithic structure, what I can equate it to are in the United States, actually, Mark, when you and I last November we went to go see you, you very nicely introduced me to Grave Creek Mound, a massive mound of earth, an earthen mound that contained burials. This is like a stone mound. It's kind of a pyramid and a mound. I think there's the pyramid, the mounds, they're kind of one and the same. Quite frankly, it's just, in my opinion, just different forms of material comprising each. So this is a massive, and I'm going to post this tomorrow. I'm doing a whole series, The 20 Days of Giants, on my page, Facebook page, The Islands of the Giants. And this will be my last post tomorrow, which is the 20th post I've done, and it's going to be about Kasabari Rock Formation. So, and I leave it to really anyone because we don't know the answer. But to me, I leave the answer to anyone. But to me, it looks very suspicious, and it looks suspicious for a couple of reasons. First of all, the stones seem to interlock. This is no mortar involved, massive stones that seem to lean one against the other till they reach up to the top. The top is a flat stone at the top that you can, if you climb up the rocks, which now they have a stairway, and go to the top, you could actually stand and lie down, sit down, and right across from it, almost double the height of Kasabari Rock Formation is a natural formation called Heuberg, which is an extinct caldera that mirrors the Kasabari. And furthermore, around Kasabari, around this whole area of this mound, are very strange rock formations. I have found a chair, which I'll be posting about tomorrow, a stone chair, stone face, balanced, massive megaton balanced stones, way larger than the balanced rock at in North Salem, New York, but just precariously balanced. Each one is pointing in the direction of another site. And also around this area of Kasabari, you will find petroglyphs and pictographs. And further, Kasabari makes, with the existence of Kasabari on the island of Aruba, it completes a geoglyph, a massive geoglyph that spans almost the entire island from east to west, of an isosceles triangle. And this isosceles triangle is uses what I believe are actually two man-made megalithic sites, Kasabari Rock Formation and one we haven't talked about yet, which is Io Rock Formation, with a natural limestone terrace that houses 4 caves in it, and which was very sacred to the giants. And that place is called Kanashito. And if you line all these up, it makes a perfect isosceles triangle. And if you calculate the probability of this happening by accident, it's 0.001% chance that this is accidental. So I feel that Kasabari was built to mirror the natural formation, such as Heuberg, that clearly had some importance to the giants, but also was to create one of the angles of this isosceles triangle that is formed across the entire country of Aruba. And isosceles triangles were very important to the giants. They buried their dead in isosceles triangles. Above the burials of the giants were stone circles. Now, these wouldn't be megalithic, but still, in terms of if you want to tie it to Europe, it's the same type of thing. The importance of a stone circle, and stone circles were made with either diorite or with limestone. Diorite stones were obviously much heavier, and in most cases much larger than the limestone. And it's not known why the one or the other was used, but clearly these two stones in general were very important to the giants. As a matter of fact, almost all of their rituals occurred on places of limestone. So the other megalithic site that I mentioned briefly before, forming an angle of the isosceles triangle geoglyph that spans Aruba, is Io Rock Formation. And Io Rock Formation looks to me, I mean, some of the stones are stacked, and then some are tumbled and strewn across. And when I say stones, I'm talking 60 tons, 70 tons, 80 tons stones or more. And it's interesting, again, if you look in the tourist publications, the brochures, it'll say, we don't know what the purposes of Io Rock Formation, where it came from, how it came up from the earth, where the stones came from. But it looks like giants were playing, and they always mention giants playing playing ball with each other with the stones. And it again, I think maybe it's part of our collective unconsciousness that we know deep down these sites must be megalithic sites that were built by the giants, or at least reworked by the giants. So maybe the stones were there, but they took the time to put them in specific directions. And again, at Io Rock Formation, we'll find balanced stones. And the balanced stones each point to another site on the island. There are also, again, petroglyphs and pictographs there. So, but the interesting part is the three islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao were actually one island at one time. This was not an island that was attached to the mainland, broke off from the mainland. It is believed it was created through a series of uplift due to volcanic and earthquake activity. But the one island became three islands through a series of mega tsunamis. The first one being 500 BC, then 1500 BC, 3500 BC, were these mega tsunamis that separated, and geological evidence proves this, that these mega tsunamis separated, made this one island into three separate islands. So it is my belief that a lot of the megaliths are, and also archaeological remains, are under the sea to this day. And interestingly, Aruba, the islands are having a very difficult time with the lionfish. The lionfish is an invasive species, and it's really decimating the coral reefs of those islands, which are very important, obviously, to the ecosystem. So there are lionfish hunters that spear hunt. They deep sea dive, they free dive, really, in some cases, and get these lionfish, and some are using scuba gear. And I was watching one of their videos about a year ago, and I noticed a lot of these megalithic stones and right angles, stones cut at right angles, balanced rocks, were under the water. And they even remarked in their comment section on their YouTube video, oh, these are the same stones that are at the rock formations. And I instantly, I couldn't believe it. I thought this was exactly what I thought all along. I actually communicate this information to the archaeologists at the in Aruba, that I think there are far more megaliths under the sea, maybe that are that more under than are above, and as well, I think there are way more archaeological remains and skeletons under the sea as well. And it would take a massive amount of time, effort, and most importantly, money to kick off an exhibition, a look and see what's going on under the sea. But I'm hopeful that some point someone will say maybe we could use some type of technology. We don't even have to send divers down there to exploratory mission just to see what's going on under here with these massive stones. So those are the megalithic sites that exist on the island. A lot of also what the giants did was remain in the caves. They did a lot of things in caves, and caves are very important to giants globally. Where you find, if you're looking for a giant, you should find caves and water. They were very into water sources, of course, and caves, which makes sense, really. But they all seem to have that in common. You'd be hard pressed to hear a story about a giant just wandering about, living in a treehouse, for example. The giants were always focused on dwelling in caves. And in the case of Aruba with the caves were used for one of three purposes. So one cave was for ritual and worship, one cave was for burial, and one cave was for habitation. And there was never any crossover between the three caves. They were distinct. Each cave had a distinct purpose. I'm not quite sure how they designated each cave for such, but it was definitely consistent, and that's consistent throughout the three islands. If you see petroglyphs in a cave, you know there has never been habitation in that cave, and there are no burials. But if you do see petroglyphs, you know burials are nearby. So in the case of, for example, Canashito, the one cave has petroglyphs, and then the next cave over, that's where the burials are. So they were very specific, and with what they did, very purposeful, and they, in my opinion, I think Kasabari Rock Formation and Io Rock Formation are man-made megalithic structures whose purpose, is still obviously unknown.
Okay, Heather, you're talking about a lot of megaliths. Part of the megalithic structures may still be underwater. We just don't know what's offshore yet. Is there any similarity with the Bimini Road that people say it's evidence of the advanced cultures of Atlantis?
Yes, it's funny. I think about that a lot. If there's a connection, and it's very possible. The Lesser Antilles, our islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao are part of the Lesser Antilles, and Antilles is based off of the disappearing island, the ghost island of Antilia. So, which would reappear, it shows up on maps, and it's not there. But the connection is then drawn that was just another name for Atlantis. So these islands have a name, say Lesser Antilles, and the connection is to Atlantis directly through the name. I believe, I don't know which European explorer specifically, but they felt that when they found these islands, Vespucci and et al. Rediscovered these islands, of course they were always there, that they thought that these were parts of Atlantis that had broken off from whatever catastrophe might have become of the island, and that these were the remnants. And they felt that that's why they have the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles. And Antilles essentially means of Atlantis. So the belief was that these were parts of Atlantis. It's very possible, and I think there could be a connection. Now, Bimini is not far from Cuba, and there are a lot of connections between the petroglyph sites, the burials, and the skeletons found in Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao, and in Cuba, in a cave system in Cuba that I'm dying to go to, and I will eventually go to at some point in my life. I know I will. As long as Americans can travel there, I'm the first one on a plane. So to think that there was travel with these giants or some sort of connection. Also, a breakaway civilization of giants was discovered by the archaeologists who were researching the giants in Aruba. They found a breakaway civilization in Colombia, a small pocket of the same giants who were doing things with the burials, their burials in isosceles triangles. This is another common theme, these isosceles triangle burials. As a matter of fact, archaeologists who were researching the three islands of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, when they would see a burial made into the shape of an isosceles triangle, they knew right away they were dealing with the giants. And so it's since now, based off of the archaeological evidence, it appears the giants did travel. It could be that this was an extensive, massive community that through these mega tsunamis, of which all the islands would have been impacted if it was that massive, could be submerged, and there could be a lot more going on under the sea. And of course, I mean, there's no question there is. It's just a matter of to what extent are we missing out on the archaeological record due to a large percentage of it potentially being submerged. So there definitely could be connections to Bimini.
Okay, I really don't know how far apart they are. I was just curious. Just what you were saying just kind of struck a note. And I was just thinking, okay. I should ask you about that. But and you also read about um, the Patagonian giants. Was that also part of Vespucci's uh, tour to that part of the world, or is that another someone else's voyage? But you hear about the Patagonian giants. I know that's much farther south, but that whole like eastern side of um, South America, and now uh, north of Venezuela, you were getting more information about giants. Is there some kind of connection between uh, the Caribbean and Patagonia?
There could be. There definitely could be a connection between the two giants. I mean, although they're much further south in Patagonia than Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, there could definitely be a connection. For example, Patagonia means Bigfoot, right? Because when explorers came, it wasn't Vespucci came ashore and saw in the sand a giant footprint of a Bigfoot. It's exactly what Vespucci saw when his men came ashore in Aruba. That was their first indication that
Same thing.
exactly maybe there are people here that when they saw the foot in the sand, they said right away, in the letters, we have to see who belongs to these feet, because whoever belongs to these footprints is clearly someone of enormous stature. So it's not hard to imagine that there could be a connection between all of the giants that are found really on a global scale. I mean, I think that it's pretty much every continent except Antarctica. We have
Hmm.
evidence of giants. So it could be a connection. Now, so I don't know if they're genetically connected in any way, but it would definitely be. It's definitely something I think about, especially in my research. Is there a connection? And it is. Is there evidence that we can? Is there enough skeletal evidence to be able to make that connection? I don't know if that exists, and I'm positive no one has done that work, but it's very possible that there could be a connection. The other interesting anatomical peculiarity, I suppose you could say, about the giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao is that they had elongated skulls, and their cranial deformation went up. So they had high foreheads and then went back. So their elongation was not up and up, as a cone type shape that you'll see in, for example, the Paracas skulls of Paracas, Peru. But these will be elongation where the forehead goes up and then back. And it's clearly cranial deformation. It's made note of several times in the archaeological reports. It's been proven by the archaeologists that it was not artificial deformation. This was a naturally occurring anatomical trait of the giants. And so I'm not sure if the Patagonia giants, I don't believe they had elongated skulls. Of course, just the fact that they're large people would assume that you would have a very large cranium, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was elongated. And that was a trait. Yes, it is interesting, because another strange thing about the giants is that they had a very intricate burial process, whereby they would inter the bodies of the giants in very specific positions and with very interesting grave gifts. And then they would exhume the skeleton and particularly generally just the head, the skull, and then paint the skull, and in some cases the whole body, in some cases just the skull, with red ochre, and then rebury the body. So, and the red ochre was from locally sourced manganese that, with the humidity of the soil, of the sand, would turn the skulls this ochre color. And so it was very interesting why they would do that, and they only did it with these giant graves, because the giants. Another point to bring up is that these were the elite of the island. The giants were the ones who were running the show. They were the leaders. They were definitely thought of in a different way. They were given more respect. And this is all things that we know simply because of the grave gifts that the giants had within their graves, the complexity of their burials, and the positioning of their bodies, and of course this ochre on their skulls. It's fascinating. So I don't know if there could be a connection with the Patagonia giants, but it's definitely interesting to note that they're very close in proximity in terms of on a global scale. The giants were clearly, I believe, intelligent, because if they did create these megalithic wonders and did survive for thousands of years, they clearly had some sort of wherewithal to do so. They were survivors, and they had an ability to perhaps travel. If they indeed had a breakaway civilization in Colombia and one in Cuba, it would make sense that they would travel to the mainland just 16 miles away, and or vice versa, and that could be possible too. That's I often wonder about that, and maybe someday we'll know.
It also sounds like you're talking about two distinct races of giants, and they could be taking canoes. And may have engineered small ships to make the shorter voyage to Venezuela and the mainland. But some of the cultural patterns sound almost like what you find in the eastern United States with some complex burials. When we've had Jason Gerald as a guest, we've talked about the like log cabins built inside the mounds built around these like log cabin features, and red ochre, but there aren't as many artifacts with some of the Adena burial, or a lot of the Adena burials, and that's a little difference. But a lot of the cultural traits do seem similar. It's interesting to ponder if they had seaworthy ships to make it to America, or vice versa. You're presenting some very interesting information. I don't know, maybe it's just kind of a global concept with using this red ochre. I don't know. You get it in Stonehenge too.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing. I would love to just do research on the red ochre, because it seems to permeate the globe. It's this this need to cover the skull. And just last summer, when I was in Aruba, our archaeologists discovered, well, not archaeologists, a local discovered, and thank goodness deferred to the archaeologists, a burial that was covered in red ochre. I mean, all the bodies, including, it was a mother, a daughter, and these were the giants, a mother, a daughter, and a monkey. and the monkey was given an elite burial on the same level of the mother and the daughter. Or it's assumed to be a mother and daughter. It was a woman and a child. But and then you think, well, why? So this monkey was clearly just part of the family. I mean, completely thought of as an equal and given an equal burial. And so you think, why? What was it with the ochre? And some burials had more ochre than other burials. Was it just the resource, having enough of the resource around to do this? In the case of Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao, it's manganese. I know the ochre is made up of different components depending where on the globe you are, but you're right. It's something that you find in many ancient burials is this red ochre. And it's interesting because the local archaeologist in Aruba told me, the head of scientific research actually at the museum told me that his research showed that the giants had light skin and light hair. They were not Native American looking per se, and he didn't think they were Native American at all in his professional opinion. And so I wondered if they had light hair, was this painting of the skull ochre kind of an ode to them once having red hair in life, like the Paracas people had red hair, and then they had elongated skulls, and their mummies were found with their red hair still intact. And I wondered if there was a connection, an ancient connection to an even more ancient race of giants who had this red hair, and maybe this ochre. I mean, this is just me making a connection. I have no proof of this, but making some sort of connection with their ancient ancestors by covering their skulls with this red. It's just it's very odd. And even the archaeologist will talk about it all the time, and he'll say, it's so strange. So one of the strangest things he feels of all, even besides the fact that they're giants with elongated skulls, is that this ochre that they find in these specific graves. It's fascinating. I would love to, if I had enough time in my life, do a whole series of research on the ochre and the mystery behind it, because it's absolutely fascinating and completely confusing.
Yeah, but you are making some interesting I'm just glad you're thinking of these possibilities. At some point the DNA may show that there is not a genetic similarity, like what you were talking about with the Paracas skulls and just say Aruba, but at least you're thinking to get people to wonder about that. So that was worth just doing the show about it. But if no one's going to come up with just think of possibilities like that. They aren't going to be tested at some point, and maybe the test will prove that you're right, or if it's something else, well, okay, at least we posed the question. But you mentioned the monkey. The pet monkey.
Yeah.
But if you read Dr. Webb's Indian Knoll, there were dogs buried with people. His Reed excavation report found it was like 260 some dog burials. So it's actually. It was common to find pets buried with people in Kentucky's Green River. So
Well,
like finding a monkey in a tropical a pet monkey in the like Amazon kind of climates isn't unreasonable to think that.
well, it is unreasonable if you realize that Aruba never had monkeys. So there are no monkeys indigenous to the island. There have never been.
It was a pet
Uh,
then. It
right,
got there somehow.
right.
I,
That's
I
the
want
key.
I want a pet monkey.
Oh, I would love a monkey. Are you kidding me? I would love it, except I travel too much. I couldn't get anyone to watch the monkey, and I'm certainly not going to bring it on the plane as a support animal or something. It's not fair to the monkey. But the monkey. That's the question. How did the monkey get to Aruba? So clearly there, and even looking, and so what I did with the monkey was fascinating because what was happening was, to give you a little background, I'll tell you the story about how this discovery came about. Last summer when I was in Aruba, I had the head of scientific research over to my home that I was renting for dinner. And as he entered into the house, he had just gotten this email and he was so excited. He said, "Look, the results came in on the skeleton we found." So, so what happened was there was a local man, a couple of months earlier than this conversation. He was looking for parrot eggs. There is a local parrot in Aruba, and he was looking for these eggs, I guess, to breed the parrots, which is, or eat them. I'm not quite sure. So he climbed up this limestone terrace and found these caves, and he reached his hand in to grab what he thought would be eggs, and it turned out he pulled out a bone, and that's when the archaeologists came in and saw this burial. And so when they saw this little skeleton, they said it looks like a primate, and they sent the bones to the University of Leiden in the Netherlands to be tested. And so when the archaeologists came to my home that evening, the results had just come in. He had just received them in real time right there, and he said, "Look, it's a monkey. There was a monkey in this burial." And what's even more interesting is, okay, so there were never any monkeys on the island of Aruba. They're not indigenous. And Aruba is not a climate that would be good for a monkey. It's an arid desert climate. I mean, most monkeys are really not in the desert, like you said, in the Amazon or something a little bit with more vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
So something to swing on, because this is an island of cacti. So, I mean,
Okay.
it'd be very difficult for a monkey to have its habitat there, but clearly this monkey was there. So then I started to do a little bit more research and found out that monkeys, particularly in ancient Egypt and with a lot of women in ancient times, the monkey was almost like their maid in waiting, like their helper, assistant, almost an equal in a sense. That the monkey was trained, and actually after I did the research, I remember when I went to India and I went to Khajuraho to see the ancient temples there, I saw this same scene, and the scene is of a monkey holding up makeup jars and women dipping their brush into the makeup, and these are all reliefs on temples, what I saw in India, and putting they're dipping their brush in the makeup and putting on their makeup, and the monkey is standing there holding jars of makeup, and a monkey is holding a tray of food. So, and in Egypt, ancient Egypt, this was a common thing as well, for monkeys to be assisting in female activities, which is really quite interesting, and another facet that I want to explore more fully. And so if this monkey was buried in Aruba on the same level as the elites with which it was interred, that would mean it was considered part of the family, very important to them, essential. And not far from where this burial is in Aruba is this massive, massive diorite boulder that is called Monkey Rock. And it is carved into a massive face of a monkey. And it always struck me, why was this monkey head here when the people, the giants, they didn't even know about monkeys? There were no monkeys. So here we are, we're wrong. They did know about monkeys. They had one on the island. And where, now you say, well, where did it come from? So clearly there was an interaction between the giants and some population somewhere, and most likely it was from the mainland of South America, where you do find an abundance of monkeys. One report I did come across was of an early explorer saying how the giants of the islands, they kept to themselves. They weren't trying to war with anyone. They weren't trying to get more land, more territory. They weren't trying to get slaves by taking over a local, a nearby tribe, or doing anything in a violent fashion. They were very peaceful unless you tried to go onto the island, in which case it was full on attack mode. The giants were going to succeed. They were known as master marks people. They could shoot arrows like no one could. Their weapons were all of giant proportion, massive spear like things, massive arrows, everything like almost like hammers they would throw at people. So to think that they would venture off the island, or actually allow someone on to trade, I suppose, is just another component about them that's just so mysterious, because ultimately this monkey shows that there was communication between the giants and other people. Just which way it went or with whom is still unknown. But I think the monkey to me was a major turning point, because a very strange thing, I never told anyone this before. When I first went to Aruba, my first time in Aruba was was when I was a child, but more recently was in 2005. And I remember I got off the plane and I asked one of the local people there, I said, do you have monkeys on this island? And I don't know what possessed me to say that. I mean, I don't know why I didn't ask, where's happy hour? Why am I looking for monkeys? I mean, the first question out of my mouth when I land in Aruba is, do you have monkeys on this island? It was so strange. And I told the archaeologists last year, I said, you won't believe this. The first question I asked when I came to Aruba literally was in the airport was, do you have monkeys here? And I remember the guy laughed at me who I asked, and now the joke's on him. But I just, to this day, I don't know what possessed me to ask that. And now hearing about this monkey, and of course seeing a monkey rock, it was just very odd. I don't know. Maybe in a past life I was a giant in Aruba. I don't know, but it was strange. And I hope that they do find, if they do find more burials on the islands, that they do find more of these monkeys or any other type of animals, because this is, aside from turtles, turtles are abundant on the islands. A lot of the elite burials of the giants contain turtle bones, bird bones. This is common, and was a common creature. But to find the monkey and to see where this grave was in such a precarious position, I mean, hidden in plain sight could be as long as 9,000 years. You start to realize that there's a chance that there are more of these burials, and that these burials were very important, and they didn't want them to be disturbed. So as a matter of fact, because the archaeologists on the islands are consider these giants their ancestors, when they come across these burials that they feel are going to be safe, that they're not in danger of being bulldozed over or ran over by an ATV or something, they will just keep it interred, and they won't do any sort of archaeological analysis of the site, because they feel that it should be, kept in its place, and which is, great and sometimes frustrating, but you have to respect that, and I understand it, and as long as it's safe, that's fine. But you do, your first inclination is, oh my gosh, let's dig it up, let's see what's around there, and that's kind of, you get so excited and caught up in the moment, but you have to realize these are the ancestors of the people of the islands, and they have a respect and a reverence for the giants. So not all of the bones that they'll find will we know any more about, except their location.
Okay. And when you're talking about the giant burials, some were found in a few of the megalithic structures. If people go to your the Islands of the Giants Facebook page, you do have maps that show ley lines. Are these some of the necropolises are on these ley lines? Is that right?
Well, yes, and they're on fault lines too.
Okay.
Both of them seem to correlate. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Somehow, in some way, the giants were able to determine where are these ley lines, and the ley lines run all through the islands. There are a few nodes not far from there, and these ley lines are all connecting through the islands. There, as well as fault lines and ley lines sometimes go hand in hand. In Aruba, they do. And what you'll also find on Aruba, and this was told to me by the archaeologists, and then I researched it further and talked to the local population, the giants knew how to recognize and use portals, and that the island is riddled with portals. Some of these portals can take you to other parts of the island. Some of these portals will take you to places unknown. Some of these portals are only one way, and they take you onto the island. So I was telling a friend last year, I stayed at a house very close to Io Rock Formation, and I was having these crazy dreams every night. And I told my friend in Aruba, and I said, I'm having these crazy dreams. And they said, well, you're right by Io. And I said, well, what is that supposed to mean? And they said, well, there are 8 portals at Io. And it was right by the summer solstice. So it might have been a time of an activation of these portals. And these portals, some of them are letting beings in, some of them are letting beings out, but they're open now, and they're constantly being traversed, and maybe that's why you're having all of these dreams. And I thought it was very interesting, because the local population fully believes there are portals. They are able to be used. They have been used in the past. And they're indicated on petroglyphs as portals. And this is the drawings that you'll see in Aruba of concentric circles and spirals, some connected with lines. Some of the circles look different than others. That indicates whether they're letting beings in or letting you travel out, or in the directionality of the portals. And it's one man. The archaeologist told me one year a man came who was a dowser, and he was able to determine all, without any maps or any prior knowledge, all of the locations of the portals. And he was absolutely correct, because everywhere that he would be led to had a petroglyph of this portal sign, which is these concentric circles attached by lines, and some not attached to lines, so meaning it's a one-way portal. But it was very interesting because the people of Aruba are very open-minded to this, and because they still retain a lot of their cultural heritage, they incorporate. I mean, it's a Catholic country, but they are, practicing Catholics, but practicing indigenous people as well, and they incorporate both of their faiths. Which you'll see this. This is something common in a lot of places across the globe. Thankfully, that these indigenous practices mesh with the religious practice, the more modern religious practices of their time, and they fully accept that there are portals on the island, and it's fascinating because if this is an oral tradition being passed down, it very well could have been an oral tradition passed down from the giants to the modern people now of Aruba.
Yeah, and speaking of these ley lines and the portals and the petroglyphs, when we're talking about these, the artwork and the engineering, were the megalithic structures built to have corbelled ceilings?
Not the ones in Aruba that I have seen, although there is a very strange. It's very strange. There is a strange structure, and I forgot to mention it. And thank you for bringing this up. Kaneshito, which was a burial site and a deeply important site to the giants. There is a chamber built of limestone, and it reminds me, and it looks identical. I have it on my webpage. It was one of my posts for the 20 Days of Giants. You can look for it if you search hashtag 20 Days of Giants. 20 is written, the word 20. There is a chamber that looks just like the chambers in upstate New York, in Putnam County, New Hampshire, Vermont, with the stone, the lintel stone at the top of the structure, and then these other stones on the side, and then it goes back, not necessarily corbelled, but definitely like an oval shape towards the back where it's enclosed, and it's that same architectural design as the chambers in Europe that you see, and the chambers here in New York and New England. It's so strange, and I've asked tons of people who built this. Is it modern? I mean, it doesn't look modern. It's completely overgrown with vegetation. You can only see it at very certain times of the year, kind of like the chambers here when the vegetation is at its lowest point, and then you can see it. But it's no one knows anything about it. There's no modern history on this chamber, and so yes, you're right. Thank you for bringing that up. There is a connection with that architecture, and it's with this chamber on the island. Now, my opinion is, if this chamber is archaic, which it appears to be, it's at an archaic site. There could have been more chambers scattered about the three islands, but just similar to what happens here in New York and New England when the site is unprotected, the stones get taken to build something else, or or just bulldoze down to put in a house or a strip mall. and with no regard to what this was or what was the purpose or how old is it and is it something that should be studied. But yes, there is a connection, and it is in this one chamber. As of this moment, it's the only chamber that I've come across on any of the three islands, and it's very mysterious. It kind of leads to nowhere, this chamber, but in the background is this enormous limestone terrace that houses this cave system that did have giant habitation, and actually giant skeletal remains were found in one of the caves. So I believe there's a connection between this chamber and this site, but its purpose is unknown.
Okay, and when if you're doing your tours and let's just say everyone congregates on Aruba, how do you get to the other two islands, Curacao and Bonaire? Do you have to take flights, or is it just a short boat trip since they were all one island, or one island at one period? What's the mode of transportation through those islands?
Well, this is a great question, because the reason why, when I'm going to be spending a month in Aruba, and part of that time I'm going to go over to Bonaire from Aruba. Bonaire is probably of the three the most difficult to get to. A direct flight just opened up from Miami to Bonaire, but you have to get to Miami, of course, first. Mm-hmm. And then the flights from Miami to Bonaire are not cheap at all, and they don't run every day. And when they do run, it's only once a day. And it's very difficult to get to Bonaire. There is a high-speed ferry that is the port is being built now in Aruba, but the high-speed ferry will still take you several hours just to get to Curacao. So they're several miles apart, and it's very difficult to get to. Aruba is very easy to get to. There are direct flights nonstop from New York, from Miami, and you can connect through any major hub and get to Aruba. Several planes a day, millions of people a year are going in and out of Aruba through cruise ships or through flights. Now, Bonaire does have a cruise ship terminal. They recently opened up, but the cruise ships hardly ever go there. Maybe once every couple of weeks, a cruise ship will come to Bonaire. And Curacao has more cruise ship activity and is slightly easier to get to, but still rather difficult and not cheap. So I'm going to island hop. I'm going to go, and that's what I did when I would go to Curacao as well. I would always leave from Aruba. Aruba is the easiest and probably cheapest to get to, and then Curacao and Bonaire. Flying is your only way. You can take a private charter. It just would take quite a while, and unless you had some time to kill, and that would be wonderful to just take a boat over to the islands and tour in that way. That's definitely a wonderful leisurely way to do it. But in the essence of time, it's best to take these flights. And for example, even the flight I'm taking to Bonaire from Aruba doesn't fly every day. It's only 3 times a week. And if there aren't enough people on the plane, they'll just cancel the flight. So you could be stranded. So I have to fly from Aruba to Curacao and then to Bonaire. I could be stranded with my daughter in Curacao. We don't even know what to expect. So it's going to be an adventure. When I would travel back and forth to Curacao, because the American consulate is in Curacao, sometimes my flight would leave 2 hours early. And if you weren't at the airport 2 hours early, you missed your flight. The plane would just take off. So it's the islands. It's definitely not like here in New York where it's 2:00 and if the plane's supposed to take off at 2 and it's 10 to 2, well then the plane's already late. So it's very structured here. It's very you're on island time down there. So the best way would be to fly to Aruba and then to island hop from there. That would be the most economical and the easiest. But it's definitely not, at this point, not as easy to get to Curacao and Bonaire as it is to Aruba. And Aruba is an amazing place. You can, find a lot of adventure and archaeology and history on that island of Aruba. Even though it is the smallest of the three islands, it, as I said, does retain a lot more of its ancient history due to the fact that there wasn't this massive presence of farming and et cetera by the early Europeans who arrived there.
Yeah, Heather, I've never been to the Caribbean. So I'm learning a lot from you. Developing an interest in going there, maybe in February.
Great. Do it.
But you've spoken about a little bit about the there are a lot of museums there, but what when you do your tours, what are people seeing at the museums when you're taking them there? Is there are there any giants on display? Are there other prehistoric artifacts out for people to see? What are in the museums on Aruba?
That's a great question. So there is one, they called it pre-ceramic, which was the name of the giants, the age when the giants lived in Aruba. Now, just as I said a week and a half ago, it was changed to archaic. It was proven that they were actually archaic, meaning that from 8,000 BC to 500 BC. So there's one archaic artifact in the museum. It's a enormous stone tool, and all it just says under it is, this is the only pre-ceramic tool we have ever found in Aruba, and which is so comical, and I'll explain why. And but the rest of the museum has a lot of the later period artifacts. So what happened was eventually the mainland Arawak Indians did come to Aruba, did settle, did start to do pottery. They had a bat cult. They worshipped bats. So they have a lot of bat cult iconography. They have their pottery. This was the introduction of pottery, very distinct patterns on these potteries. The burials were very distinct. They were in urns, burial urns. They were the bodies, after they died, they were taken apart and put into these urns and then buried. So their archaeological remains are far more abundant than the archaic archaeological remains, which of course makes sense just based on the great antiquity of the giants versus the more later Arawak Indians who arrived. So it's a lot of the Arawak Indian, particularly from Venezuela, remnants, like their buttons that they made, sculptures that they made, their bats, with these pottery with bats on them, and really cool stuff, but very little on the giants, except this one stone tool. Now, just last year, a friend of mine on the island was looking in the caves, and he found a massive stone tool. As soon as he found it, he sent me a picture, and he said, can you believe the size of this tool I found in the caves? And where he found the tool is exactly where the giants used to hang out. And I said, well, that's definitely an ancient, tool from the giants. You take it to the museum, see what they say. And he took it to the museum, and they said this was the largest tool, archaic tool they had ever seen so far. So then when I went to Aruba last year, my friend took me to the spot where they found this tool. And I looked behind me, and all over there were tools. The entire, I mean, as far as you could see, there were remnants of ancient stone tools, massive stone tools, heavy stone tools, all strewn across the desert sand. And I said, well, this must have been where they were making the tools, clearly, because you could see tools in various forms of completion. And some were broken, some were where you could tell where they started creating it and then they, for some reason, stopped. Some had been used. So, I mean, it was just, it was amazing. It was as if time had stopped and you could see exactly where they were all working on these tools, maybe, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago. And it was absolutely incredible. And I think, wow, there's so much that could be in that museum. So this tool, the archaeologists collected the tool, and now it's in the basement of the archaeology museum. So where all the good stuff is. So the other, so that's all that's going on in that museum in terms of the archaic giants. Now in Curacao, at the Curacao Museum, there were 2 skulls on display of the giants in that museum. And just today I posted on my Facebook page about how a reporter in 1980 in the Reading Eagle from Reading, Pennsylvania, was talking in an article about their recent trip to Curacao and saying how they went to the Curacao Museum, and of particular interest were these 2 skulls on display of the giants who lived on the islands and were about 7 to 8 feet, were over 7 to 8 feet tall. And so when I saw this article, I thought, I've got to find these skulls. So, of course, my first inclination was to call the Curacao Museum, which I hadn't been to yet. And they told me, oh, we just went through massive renovations. We have no idea where the skulls are. Call the Archaeology Museum. So I called the Archaeology Museum in Curacao. And they said, oh, we don't know where they are. You have to talk to someone at the Curacao Museum, another person. So I called this other person at the Curacao Museum, and they said, we think they're somewhere in the Netherlands, that the government came, they took the 2 skulls, and they are not here on the island of Curacao. My goal was to get them back to Aruba, where they belong, because they were actually taken out of a cemetery in Aruba and then brought to Curacao and put in the museum. To this day, I have not found the skulls, but equally as difficult as finding the skulls were finding pictures of the skulls. I could not find any photos, and I knew an entire archaeological report had been written up about these skulls. Finally, after 8 years I looked for this archaeological report. I finally found a copy of it in an antique bookshop in Europe. And I have finally pictures of these skulls, and one of them I posted just today. And they're absolutely fascinating and completely strange and bizarre. And I wish I could see them firsthand. And those are the only 2 reports I have of these giants being on display in the islands. Now, it could be that a lot more is in the basement of the Archaeology Museum. For example, the largest, most complete giant skeleton ever found was found in Bonaire. It's called the Bonaire skeleton. It was believed to be upwards of 8 feet tall, probably taller. And that skeleton is supposed to still be in Bonaire. So my first stop after I get off the plane will be to go to the Archaeology Museum and inquire about that skeleton. Now, that skeleton, again, is not on display, and it's supposedly in the basement. So it's always a challenge getting this stuff to make it to the main floor. I don't know why. To me, I find it so fascinating. I even told the archaeologist in Aruba, I said, you imagine if we get back these skulls, what a draw it will be in the museum to have them, on display, and you can advertise about how these skulls are back and they're on display and people can see them. He said, well, if we would even put them on display. So, oh my gosh, this is so challenging. Why can't we see these things? It's just so strange. And it seems to be globally that everyone wants to kind of keep it on the down low about the giants. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's not freak people out with the giants. It's just so strange. I don't get it. But yeah, so the museum, I highly recommend the Archaeology Museum in Aruba to anyone. It was actually the people who helped build it, ironically enough, were the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian, it's kind of interesting, right? And the Archaeology Museum in Aruba, they called each other sister museums. So the Smithsonian helped build this museum, and hey, I mean, a lot of the stuff could even be there. Who knows? I mean, it seems that that's a common theme too: is things ending up at the Smithsonian, never to be seen again.
Yeah, the big basement.
Exactly. I've been to the basement of the Archaeology Museum in Aruba, and it was incredible, the things that are down there. And I just, the whole time I was thinking, I can't believe that no one can see these things. And you just can't even figure out why. And, they say space and this and that. There's not enough room. And I don't know. I don't know. I think sometimes there isn't enough room, and sometimes maybe there are other motives involved.
Okay. Well, we've heard a lot about the Caribbean islands, and maybe we ought to go over the other side of South America and hear about your adventures on Easter Island.
Yes, that was a wonderful trip. That was great.
The photos you have there are phenomenal. That must have been just awe-inspiring trip. What was it like? What was the impression it left on you?
Yeah, it's such an archaeological wonder, and the moai are so strange. Yeah, you get this really strange vibe from them. They're larger than you even can imagine, and even though you see them on TV and you see video, it doesn't matter. Once you are in front of them and you the magnitude of the size of these things is
how tall are they?
I mean, the largest one that never made it, it fell before it was going to get to the base. I believe it was 20 feet long. I mean, they're massive, and they're heavy. I mean, just the stone is just ridiculous. I mean, when Ahu Tongariki, which was destroyed by a tsunami, and that's actually on my Facebook page, Heather L. Arnold. That's on my wall, is the picture in front of that Ahu with all the moai there standing. They all had to be put back up on the base because they had all been knocked down by this mega tsunami that came through. The archaeologist I traveled through Easter Island with, his parents were archaeologists who were the ones who reconstructed that site. And they had to actually invent technology to get these moai back onto the platform. They could not. There was nothing on this earth that could lift these stones, these monoliths, these moai, and put them back on the platform. And this Japanese company, because Japan feels culturally connected to Easter Island, they created this massive crane type machine that they basically had to bring over in parts on ships piece by piece and build this machine on the island and on Easter Island, and then place these moai back on this platform. I mean, just an astronomical feat. To think that that's what we had to go through in modern times to put the moai back on the platform. How did it get done thousands of years ago? How? I mean, and when you go to Vanapu, which that is the wall in Aruba, a megalithic wall. Aruba, sorry, Easter Island, a megalithic wall where you can those stones. There is no mortar, and the stones are so closely put together that you can't even get a piece of paper through this into the slits between the stones. It's that well built. Still to this day, no idea how. It's just baffling. And interestingly, some of the oldest moai on the island of Easter Island are female moai, which I didn't even know female moai existed. And,
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, and they look very strange. They don't look like the moai you're used to seeing in the pictures. These look, I mean, quite frankly, for lack of a better term, alien. I mean, they look very bizarre. Elongated skulls, long ears, long faces, long bodies, like just almost like Akhenaten's body, this strange, almost misshapen body. And the female moai all seem to be pregnant, which is also quite interesting and could be indicative of a female-dominated society. Because interestingly, the correlations that I made between Easter Island and the islands of the giants, Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao, is that as the moai in Easter Island the females are shown as pregnant. In Aruba, there are two petroglyphs, and they are both of females, and they are both of pregnant females. So this is another strange little fact I couldn't believe. And to see, this is not something strange. This is worship of the female in the form of the Divine Mother. You see this on a global scale. It's the oldest religion on the planet is the worship of the female in the form of the Mother. And so now you start to think, were these civilizations all contemporaneous of one another? And were they the same people just spread all over the globe and practicing this same worship of the female and these megaliths and monoliths? And it's just you start to make connections when you go to Easter Island to other places on the globe. Yet no other place really has these massive moai. But when you do look at some statues across the globe, you can see similarities with the moai. For example, statues where the hands are on the belly. That pose is a common pose that you'll find globally, particularly in South America, actually. So that was, to me, just incredible to see the size of the moai, the female moai, trying to figure out how they moved the moai. And then I did go into a lot of caves in Easter Island, which the cave system was just recently discovered in terms of its complexity. The island is riddled with caves, and it's the same type of situation that we had in Aruba. So I went into a cave in Easter Island that was worked, for lack of a better word. They made stone beds, stone chairs, stone tables, and just inside the cave, taking what was in the cave and carved them into places where they could live and sleep even. And then you saw some caves like the Maki Maki cave that is just filled. The entire cave was no habitation there. It was just all petroglyphs of faces. The entire cave was filled with carved faces of their creator god, Maki Maki. And so, again, there's this similarity of certain caves were for rituals, certain caves were for habitation, and they did also find some burials in these caves. And it's just fascinating. The most fascinating moai to me on the entire island was the moai with four hands. This moai has, it's five fingers on each hand, but has actually four arms and four hands, which is, it's really four hands. It's just two arms and then two hands coming from each arm. It's very strange, and then also another correlation between Easter Island and the islands of the Giants was the one stone in Easter Island that's considered the navel stone. This is the stone through which everyone was born on the islands, and it connects directly into the earth to the mother goddess. And that same mythology, the same story, is told in Bonaire, where there's a stone called the Mother Stone, and it's considered the navel of the island. And all of the people of the islands were thought to be born of this stone. And again, it connects, it has an umbilical cord that connects through the stone into the center of the earth to the mother goddess who gives birth to all of the people. So it's, again, you're hearing the same stories, the same phrases used. It was fascinating, and it just even deepened my appreciation for these ancient people going to Easter Island. It's absolutely incredible. If you ever have the opportunity to do it, do so. I hope to go back in my lifetime because I figured out how I can do it even easier with the flights, but it's still not even easier. The worst part about Easter Island is getting to Easter Island and then getting back home, because it took me 3 days to get to Easter Island. I spent 5 days there and then 3 days to get home. So it was brutal, but it was worth it. And as I said, I would do it all again. But it was incredible. And it's hard to even express to people how you feel. It just stays with you. When you leave Easter Island, you'll always have this feeling of being there. It's a very interesting place, and the energy is quite intense, and it's wonderful. And I recommend it to anyone who's just on the fence about going. Definitely go, do it. You'll never regret it.
Yeah. What's the population of Easter Island now? Do we know how many people were living there when the moai were erected? And a related question is who are the faces? Are they gods or just the social elites and VIPs of the day?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's sure about what the population is at the time of the building of the original moai, because the original moai were made of basalt, and that basalt is now underwater. The water levels have risen, and that quarry where that basalt was which is on the north coast of Aruba, of Easter Island, which I hiked. That whole quarry is now submerged. So at whatever point that quarry was not submerged was when the oldest moai were being built. And I don't know what the population was at that time. I don't know, quite frankly, if anyone does. And what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry. Yes, okay. Who the moai represent. So the archaeologists, so no two moai are the same, which is, so in terms of expression, in terms of this, they have symbols on their backs. No two are the same. And the archaeologist I was traveling with, he said that they were their ancestors. They were the people who had passed on, and that they became gods in death. And this was to commemorate them. And perhaps some of them were kings of the chiefs of the tribes. And this was also a way that this was just transferring the soul from the body now to the moai, and when the eyes were placed on the moai, and the eyes were made of coral and with black obsidian for the pupil. When they were placed on the moai, then the moai was activated, and its mana was activated. And the mana is this spiritual essence, this matter, this power, this life force. As a matter of fact, you'll see some moai, particularly in the quarry, that have cup marks, that have cupules in them, where the archaeologists said people were trying to scoop out the mana, the power, the life force from the moai. That the moai can still, to this day, the local people in Easter Island fully believe that the statues have this power in them, that the moai have this power, and that's why they have such trouble welcoming tourism, which they know they need tourism, and being kind of ashamed at what they're doing with tourism, because as with in the islands in the Caribbean, so is going on in Easter Island, that these people in Easter Island, they feel these are their ancestors, the moai. This is their spiritual connection to the past, and these are ritualist places. These are places of worship, and they should be revered. And now locals are taking tourists up, and we're taking pictures, with the moai, and so it's a real challenge to these indigenous populations of the islands with these sites, and that's something else that plays into all of this, and trying to find the true history, is a lot of the locals protecting their heritage, not wanting tourists there, not wanting researchers there, and really just wanting to keep the spiritual aspect of their society intact without the encroachment of tourism and interlopers, essentially. So, yeah, they fully believe that these moai still hold these souls, these spirits, these life forces within them, and that they are still revered as such. So that's what they believe the moai to be.
Yeah, and we're mostly aware of the ones that are standing on the cliffs, facing the sea. But yeah, it seems like there have been several that were discovered buried. What's that all about?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they all have bodies. They're not just heads. They all have bodies. Some bodies obviously larger than others, but they all have bodies. I think what happened, I mean, where I stay, I rented a house on a beach by Ahutahai. So there were a bunch of moai right outside my doorstep, and then the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And it wasn't until, it's so crazy, you get so wrapped up in what you're doing and seeing and everything. And then one morning I had a balcony outside my bedroom, and it was a second floor bedroom, and I walked outside to the balcony to watch the sunrise. And then I noticed there's a huge sign. It says tsunami zone. It's like a big sign with a cross, skull and crossbones. And so what's happening is, and this island has been really battered by tsunamis over time. And these moai are of such great antiquity. I think just these repeated battering by these tsunamis has caused the sediment to build up around the moai, and then for them to be buried. Maybe there are cases where they were purposely buried, maybe as revenge or something like this, of one tribe to another. But for the most part, I think just due to their great antiquity and the series of tsunami events that have occurred in Easter Island, I think that is what caused these moai to become buried. And it's very hard to get permits to dig in Easter Island. It's very hard to even get people to spend the money to do research in Easter Island because it's expensive. And it's also, most of the island is protected archaeological sites. That's why it's regulated each day how many people can come in and out of the island, because most of the island is still unexplored, unexcavated archaeological ruins. So you have to, as soon as you land, you have to pay money to just go in to see the moai right at the airport, because as soon as you step out of the airport, you're seeing moai everywhere. They're all over the place. We just see the famous ones, but they litter the island. And yes, and some of them are buried, and some have been uncovered, but then buried again by archaeologists. And I'm sure it's to protect them, but it would be nice to see one, fully excavated. But you can see them in other of the moai that have been excavated, and you can look at their backs, and they seem to have like type of loincloth on with ankhs and other spiral symbolism, and very, very common symbolism found globally are on the backs of these moai. And it's very strange and very interesting, but that's really all that I think. But there could be something deeper for why they're buried, but I think it's just because of their great antiquity and what they've gone through, which is why they're buried, and because of the difficulty doing excavations there is why they're still buried.
Yeah, Heather, I just maybe it's just the photos I've seen where it seemed like the moai are perched on a ridge overlooking the ocean. I didn't realize that like the quarry, maybe some of the other ones are down by the beach, and the tsunami knocked some over, buried them with sediment, and but you're talking about the quarry is submerged now. We've earlier in the show, we're talking about the Bimini Road is now submerged. You're thinking that there's reasonable expectation that some structures are submerged around Aruba. It's interesting to look at the effects of rising sea levels on archaeological sites around the world.
Yeah, I think that's, I think a lot of, even Graham Hancock talks about this, that a lot of these sites are submerged globally. It's just the way it is. There's been a rise in sea levels over the thousands of years, and if there's been an earthquake or a volcanic activity, this can compound it, and definitely tsunami events. So I think, the next great frontier here on Earth is below the sea, and right on the outskirts of these civilizations that once existed. For sure in Aruba, for sure elsewhere in the Caribbean. Definitely Easter Island. The caves. There are caves in Easter Island that are submerged, that weren't submerged before. There are caves in Bonaire that are submerged that weren't submerged before. It's on a global scale that we can definitely. Even by Catalina Island, there are some indication of maybe some structures under the sea. Definitely off the coast of India, they're finding more and more stuff. As technology gets better and better, maybe we don't even have to dive to or create you know, you know, some type of machine to go under the water and submersibles to look for these things, that we can actually just look through some sort of technology that makes it less intrusive. But I think a lot of the story can be told further by looking under the sea. And until we do really explore the underwater world of these ruins, that we won't ever get the full story, or at least get closer to the full story, because we may never probably ever get the full story. But I think that this is, you know, a common theme on a global scale, and I just, you know, it's a matter of getting technology, getting people to do it, getting the money together to do it, getting the permission to do the research, and that all takes time and a lot of work. And you know, a lot of people just figure, why bother? But I think that's really the next frontier here in exploration and in putting the pieces together for this ancient puzzle, is exploring under the sea.
Okay. And Heather, we're down to about 4 minutes. Do you want to give out your yeah, all your Facebook pages, and you have a book coming up? Anything else you want to promote as we wind the show down, please?
Yes, sure. Well, firstly, I'll be at Phantom Fest in Lebanon, Virginia. I'll be doing a presentation, an hour presentation on the giants. I'll also be there for a meet and greet, and that is going to be on November 2nd of this year in Virginia. It's Phantom Fest, PHA, not Phantom like that, not with an F, phantomfest.com. Not actually, I don't know if it's a .com. He's Phantom Fest. He has a Facebook page. I think that's the easiest way to find out how to register. I do think he has a web page, but I'm not going to say that if it's not working. Then my book should be ready by then, hopefully fully completed. My book will be The Islands of the Giants, The Lost Race of Giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. So in November, I'll also be signing my books. And I have several Facebook pages for The Islands of the Giants is one, my personal page, Heather L. Arnold, and I have a Facebook group called Stones, Bones, and the Paranormal, where we just share all this kind of hidden history, interesting stories that we might have missed in archaeology and other aspects of the ancient world, and even now things that we're finding that fit into that genre. And and then I have tons of podcasts on YouTube that, and now this wonderful one I did this evening with you guys. So you can find my information there as well.
Okay, cool. And it's we have about 3 minutes left. People can tune in Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We have another spectacular show lined up. Tonight was just a great way to get the week started off on a great note. And is Captain Cook one of the first white people to see Easter Island?
I think it might have been Captain Cook. Yes, I think you might be right.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that. I think there are a couple watercolors that if it wasn't Captain Cook, it was another one of the famous British admirals, or whatever the title is, who stopped at that island. And it's just always intrigued me, and I was just so glad that you were able to give us such thorough, firsthand eyewitness accounts of actually being there.
Yeah, I was thinking because its name is Easter Island, but I think it was the Dutch who first got there on Easter, which is why it was called Easter Island, I think. But I'll have to research that again. But yeah,
Okay.
no, it's been wonderful recounting my time there with you.
Okay, and speaking of time, we are just about out of time.